here we are again. I'm Bill Carell, and we are lighting the candle, a world that works. I've got with me my dearest friends, at least in the virtual world. I've got my dear friend Lisa Sheehan and Jan Jeremias, and then also Ken Caputo. And every week we get together and we have a pretty nice conversation, I want to say, just among friends. It gets contentious every once in a while, but not more than 5 or 10 seconds at a time. And the point of the whole deal is for us to have a conversation whereby we experience the transformative experience of being empowered. And if we get that done with us, we're pretty sure it's happening with you too, our dedicated listeners. And I'm not ever quite sure how many episodes we have, but I think up to this point, this is like episode number 105 or 106. So we're having a ball doing this, and we really appreciate you coming along with us. And please, while you're listening, send us your telepathic thoughts from the future, and we will interpret those in the midst of our conversation and answer all those questions and concerns that I'm sure you're going to have. So, with that said, we kicked off last week, and we had a really nice quote. And I'm wondering if anybody else brought a quote or something that you'd like to use as fodder for a conversation.
I had a simple one that came up just in a conversation with someone a couple of days ago that might be interesting. It was just we make the world a more peaceful place by being a more peaceful person.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I've got one more for you. It's a quote by legendary basketball coach of the UCLA Bruins with all of their 9 or 10 championship rings for the NCAA. And he had many quotes because he wrote books on mindset and all that sort of thing. So the good person part of it would definitely fall into his teachings. He was never interested in training athletes. He was only interested in training human beings. And as a result, what he said, what you learn after you know everything, that's the important stuff. So perhaps we could bounce back and forth between those two conceptual feelings because one of them has an essence of it of being a good person, the essence of being a person, the essence of goodness. And the other one, for some reason, just keeps popping that curious mind thing, curiosity and intellectual thirst for the next bit of knowledge and understanding. And I think Lisa had to duck off for just a second. I'm sure she'll be back. So, Ken, what would you like to say about the quote that you mentioned?
Well, it came up in a conversation with someone, just one of the many cool humans I get to talk to, and uh, it was in relation to a lot of just the things that are happening currently, in the world. And one of the things that we were discussing was how there are a lot of people, globally. It's not just the U.S. that are kind of in love with the idea of the world being a violent and dangerous place, and a lot of their responses, their preparation, the way they frame the experience of their life is around that idea,
Yeah.
and and that cannot be changed. Like, so either you're prepared for the world to be a violent place, or you're going to be unprepared. So so he was sharing just some perspectives from some Eastern philosophical traditions, and that's one of the things that he said. Just and it was a quote that he had heard from someone. I think it was actually a Buddhist monk, that he had been speaking to, and it was just the idea of, if you cut through it all, if you we kind of, whatever we think about expands. So, if you see the world as a violent place, and that's kind of how you know that's how you present yourself, is as a violent person ready to respond to violence or whatever, then is that all you're going to see? So, so his choice. And here I am, a martial artist that trains people to prepare to defend themselves, but I'm a very, very peaceful person, I think. And I believe that your martial arts is really not for self-defense, it's for personal development and cultivating that. And then if something bad happens, you'll be more ready for it. So that was the context of it, and I just found it kind of interesting if you look in and you think in terms of what it would be like for you to choose to present yourself as a more peaceful person, to engage in conversation as if you were a more peaceful person. What would that do to the experience of the way you interface with the world around you?
Yeah. And what does peaceful mean to different people? What does it imply? What will they infer from that, that question?
Yeah, and this was really geared, again, it was just simply around the idea of, the two core tenets of, like, he'd been speaking to someone who came from the Buddhist tradition, and they were just talking about mindfulness and compassion,
Yeah.
and how mindfulness kind of made its way into a lot of Western culture, but not so much the compassion part. And, when you experience compassion and you have a level of self-awareness and awareness of what's going on around you, it becomes easier to think in terms of kindness and tolerance and respect. And by nature, byproduct of that is you probably will be a more peaceful person.
Yeah, it sounds like a different version of happy wife, happy life, And and I think one of the most telling things about any of this, if you're authentically that person, the person that creates a world that's peaceful because their way of being and their human beingness is peaceful. Um, I don't know. I'm a very strong believer in the law of attraction, and what goes around comes around, and you reap what you sow, and all of the other things that have something to do with taking responsibility for being the instigator or the starter, or like, lighting a candle or something like that. There's an action part of being a peaceful person and creating a peaceful world, I think.
I'll jump. We had a spiritual gathering on Sunday as usual, and we were talking about violence basically. So be more peaceful, um, but to, to be aware of what you're harboring as far as hate within yourself to other people, because you have to be more peaceful within yourself, and hate is a strong emotion. So if you're giving out that energy, and one of the women gave the example of like a woman had told her, a chorus teacher had told her that she should never sing again. And she said she hated that woman she still hates that woman today. Now she realizes that she has to like kind of heal that in order to be a more whole and peaceful person. You have to figure out where you're holding on to violent and hateful thoughts against what people and heal those.
Probably not one of the most successful mentors.
Exactly.
It's funny. Have you considered, taking up chess? You know,
Well, I had a similar thing happen to me. Like a woman at from my church too had said to me, we were playing this game where you had to tell three statements about yourself, and one of them was false.
yeah.
So I said I play the guitar, and so she said, "Well, I know it can't be you play the guitar because I've heard you sing."
You
And I
know,
haven't been able to sing at church since.
I never cease to be amazed by how unknowingly rude human beings can be to each other. Or maybe it is an on purpose rudeness. Who knows?
Right.
And how did that make you feel, Lisa?
I stopped singing.
Oh,
At church anyhow. No, but she doesn't come to church. She stopped coming to church shortly after that, and not because of that, obviously, but uh, or maybe.
then I don't think it matters too much if you sing or not.
Well, we don't sing on Zoom anyhow. We have because that's really bad.
It's funny you should say that. True story. My wife and I went away to a retreat in the 1990s called Cursillo de Colores. And it's a weekend that's steeped in song, singing, and guitar playing. And one retreat weekend is the men's weekend, and another retreat weekend is the women's weekend. And we came back and we started a music ministry. 2 Sundays a month, we would do guitar music at the 10 o'clock service. And we started out, we tried it out on a Wednesday evening with a special group of people that showed up 4 weeks in a row, which is when the pastor finally said, "All right, you guys are ready for prime time." And we had a ball. And, it's one of those things when you have 100 or 150 people all singing at the same time and the guitars are amplified, no one person's voice really sticks out all that much, which makes it very joyous. Zoom, I don't think it's going to be a real thing, easy thing to recreate. So, Jan, I know you got stuff percolating over there. And so we got this whole notion of, well, I think of Forrest Gump too. Mom always says stupid is as stupid does, right? Or she could say peaceful is as peaceful does.
Yeah, I've been, as everybody's been chatting, I've been really thinking about this idea of, I mean, I guess maybe because it's hard for me to look at the world as a violent place. So, it's just not how I see the world. And it's also hard for me to look at people as being other than inherently good. So, it's how which always, which is hard. But as I think about even in that mindset, how where you look at people as inherently good is how you look at yourself first, because the quote starts out with, if you have peace within, or if you're peaceful, there's a better chance, obviously, that increases the potential for peacefulness around you. But how often people actually don't feel particular peaceful to themselves. And so when Ken was talking about practicing compassion, or that whole idea of mindfulness and compassion, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, well, how many people actually are compassionate to themselves and forgiving of themselves and, peaceful toward themselves? And I think it's almost human nature to actually sometimes feel like you can accept flaws in other people far better than you can accept flaws within yourself.
Yes, it's a remarkable thing. The psychological studies that have been done, there's always that question, nature and nurture, uh, culture or chromosomes. And what they've found is that people tend to be reasonable to their surroundings. So if people are in a situation where they're viewing, a lot of violence, they tend to take on one perspective of the world and how people are. And if they're in another situation where they're they tend to be in kind of a peaceful set of surroundings with a lot of quiet time and a lot of meditation and self care and self love. They take on a quite different way of looking at things. And I do know that one of the studies that I saw had two groups of people, one watching CNN and the other one watching Fox News. Now, I don't know why they picked those two networks, but they did. And they had them watch it for 60 days. And then they turned around and said, great. So, they asked them some baseline questions. What do you believe about this, that, and the other thing? And so they said what they said. Then they said, okay, now we're going to switch roles. And you folks that have been watching Fox, you're going to watch CNN. And you folks that have been watching CNN, you're going to be watching Fox. And at the end of the next 30 days, what do you think happened? People's mindsets on world politics and views of occurrences changed dramatically and flipped. In most cases, what they found was people were at least now open to the possibility that hearing all their news from one source or the other was probably not good for them. Which I think is kind of an amazing thing. But you can also project that onto whether or not we're creating a culture of people who typically have an opportunity to learn how to have a peaceful life and a peaceful way of being.
I have an example because my brother-in-law used to listen to talk radio all the time, and we finally said to him, or my sister, we kept hinting, not, why don't you try listening to something else? And so now he's been listening to NPR and probably music stations more. And all of a sudden he started coming up with these comments like, I believe, like Jan was saying, that the world is inherently good. I think there's a lot more good happening than we are aware of,
Yeah.
which the rest of us have been saying for a long time. But he finally caught on to it. And it was kind of cool that just by making that small switch, he's more peaceful in himself, really, because he's more peaceful about the world. So like Ken was saying, that goes to the quote too.
Kind of a fun thing about that is when you consider that the only information that you're going to think about today are those things that were left behind by yesterday and new information that comes in today. So while you're pretty sure that everything that you're seeing is either this way or that way, when you start to see that all you're listening to are narratives that are this way or that way, what you find out is neither one of them is very true. Actually, there's just a small group of people that are filling your mind with all of this nonsense. That once you can step back a little bit and be a little bit like Ken and me, I haven't watched a news program in close to a month. And I went to a place this morning who was telling me about, how Donald Trump has got himself in hot water again. And I said, I want to tell you something. It's very freaking refreshing to me to not have an opinion about what you're talking about because I have no knowledge, no basis in it at all. And frankly, Scarlett, or frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And so she looked at me and she smiled and she said, well, you can probably imagine how it went. I said, yes, I can probably imagine how it went. And we didn't need to say another thing. That's where that, the practicing of peacefulness and serenity and acceptance. In a conversation like that, sometimes there's a need to make the other person wrong. And that's what Ken was talking about, where that believing that the world is a violent place or believing that the world is a dichotomy of ideas, either this or that, which means the people on this side are locked out of this side and the people on this side are locked out of this side. But we know there's how many different colors in a big box of Crayolas? I mean, seriously, there are no black and white, really. And if you only use black and white when you have 64 different colors to draw with, you might want to take a hard look at what's motivating it. Or put the black and the white down and try something else for a minute.
Well, there's some interesting things that we have kind of working against us that are just part of the fact that we're human that some smart people have been sharing with me. I mean, and one of them is something that we perceive as a threat. We're going to feed more attention to it because that's how we've survived as a species. So, so that's why, the scary things and, the things that could be a threat, we feed a lot more attention to that. So of course, then the media, that's why, people don't really watch feel good stories as much as they're going to watch something that could potentially cause harm, so of course those things get exaggerated because it's been monetized. So, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's healthy to, you can't wander through the world thinking everything will be okay. you know like gravity works, so if you just wander off a cliff, you're gonna that's gonna be a problem. If you go into an area where people are violent, you can't just be peaceful and expect them to respect it. So there's like that part of it. And then the other thing is the research coming out about the chemical addiction to confirmation bias. So, which it doesn't matter what it's confirming, it's just if you've adopted a system of beliefs and then something validates that, it gives you this dopamine kick that's like 10 times more powerful than cocaine. It's crazy. So, so I mean, if you believe the world is a violent place, you're actually looking forward to the violence
Yes.
because you feel good then. So, so I know people in the martial arts, they've trained their whole lives to be able to beat someone up, basically, to defend themselves or defend their loved ones. So they're kind of looking forward to someone being violent so they get to actually use that skill, and it's an interesting thing. In my approach, what I was taught was, if you do it right, you'll be able to navigate away from violence so well that you probably will never have to physically use your martial arts. And that's been true for me. Like, I only got in fights before I started studying the martial arts and have not had that happen since in 30 years. So, and some of that's luck, of course, and some of it's environment, all of that kind of stuff. But there's definitely been many situations where I chose to stay peaceful and aware. And because of that, the fork in the road de escalated the situation. But if I had been attracted to the idea of I'm prepared for this violence, I'm ready for this, that probably would have pulled me towards having been in situations where I had to use my art physically. So it's just kind of interesting how that's just human, you know?
Yeah, and mostly it doesn't get named, Ken. What happens is something like a Rorschach test, which it means nothing. It only gives you an opportunity to unconceal your confirmation bias. The fact that you see anything in it at all uh, doesn't mean that there's really actually something there, because every human being is going to process a little bit differently. But as you're talking about, there is a correlation between people in dangerous jobs taking on dangerous training, putting themselves in dangerous situations, and probably some sort of a breakdown involving a lot of anger or violence, as a young child, or some situation where they felt powerless and decided to never let that happen again. I had a friend that I played poker with in Florida, and his name was Turtle, and he was a retired Navy SEAL. And Turtle said, he when we're playing cards, he would go. I may have talked about Turtle before, but Turtle would go from, you know, easygoing, mild mannered, milk toast to DEF CON 5 when I have to take him outside and talk him in off a cliff when he had a bad beat or something, right? And one time we're out there, we're talking, and he looks at me because he was almost 70 years old when I knew him. So it'd been a while since he'd actually been active. And he said, Bill, he said, I learned something very early on, that there was a real strong correlation between my anger and how much I got my butt kicked. Like, that was really the whole thing that he was all about. He wanted to get into scrapes. He wanted to see how it went, and he wasn't worried about losing a fight. Not like he ever did, as far as I could tell. But that was one of the reasons, that his calling card was, well, where did you go? Well, everywhere the Secretary of State said we didn't. So, kind of an interesting way, to express what his 25 or 30 years, in the service was all about. There was a headline, and the Secretary of State denied it. We were there. So anybody else ever, take on a fighting role and capacity in response to having, an angry past?
I mean, I had a stressful and sort of dangerous role, but it wasn't, I didn't deal with it. I mean, I don't look at as that I did that to be, to deal with anger. I know I got out of it because I felt like I was losing my soul,
Right.
so I left it because I felt like I couldn't, it was probably so against my nature to be in that environment that I kind of said, okay, I'm done. So I'm leaving.
Yeah, I said that partly for our listeners too, because I'm certain that there are people that are listening to this that have some unresolved, you know, things that kind of put their nose up against the glass in the corner and in the dark at periods of time when they're not expecting it to happen. And that can create a very large hiccup, in the quality of your life and quality of the people's lives around you.
Mhm.
And it's always really helpful to have somebody who can go into your mind with you because it's typically a very dangerous neighborhood.
That's why people don't like yoga and meditation or some other practices because they have to go into their mind, and it's sometimes scary and what they might call dangerous place to go.
Which is why it's always good to have someone like you around, Jan.
Not only me, but but yeah, it's always nice to be with people who are doing it too.
Yeah, it's interesting again to use that word. This is where there's an actual commitment to understanding. I think that that's the nature of interesting, as opposed to entertaining, or something else where it's engaging you for a moment, but not really having the opportunity to make any difference. I think being interested in something means there's something at stake by the observer actively being involved with the process of whatever they're observing. So the interesting part of it is to watch people who find themselves in a new set of circumstances, such as public speaking in a group setting, that sort of thing. Or maybe it's the first time that they've come out, they've got their white belt and they've gone through a couple of months of learning the initial kata or forms. And now it's time for them to stand and deliver and be watched by the whole rest of the room. All of these other people that they're pretty sure are much better at karate than they are. And then you get the people who seems like they're ready for the world stage. And when they show up in front of the microphone, it's humiliating. They're not ready for the world stage at all in terms of what is being called for by the times, being called for by the listeners, by the stakeholders that are looking for folks to make a difference. It's amazing how many people stand up and fall flat on their face with connecting with an audience and bringing them any information that's either useful or interesting. So it's a universal bugaboo, if you will. Personally, I'll never forget my first public speaking engagement. I mean, after it was outside the family where I was actually getting paid to go and talk to a group of people. I was a pretty headstrong individual who thought I probably knew how to handle it. Well, it was a group of management types down in Saybrook, evening meeting. There were probably, I don't know, 50 or 60 different line supervisors and middle managers and that sort of thing. And it was an international management council meeting. And I stood up and I told a joke, and it wasn't funny to anyone. Talking about a Led Zeppelin. I mean, it crashed and it burned. And I looked around and my face got bright red and my Adam's apple went all the way up in the back of my throat. And I just looked around and said, you know what, everybody, I apologize for that. Let's talk. But the first 15 or 20 seconds, which lasted almost 3 minutes by the time I finally got my ability to breathe and speak again, that was the longest 3 minutes of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, I was a young man. I was 25 years old. And somebody had seen me public speaking in an environment that I was very comfortable on a topic that I'm very comfortable with, and speaking to a bunch of managers who I thought were much better martial artists than me. I wasn't prepared for it. And when I thought I knew everything, what I learned after that was pretty cool. But not until later.
I think it's the idea of being comfortable. So I think it's very different when it's, when you come towards something or into something,
Yeah.
and it's like taking a photograph that's staged versus taking a photograph that's natural. You know, I had the experience. I did a workshop where we had to take selfies of ourselves, and which is very interesting experience if you don't like to have your picture taken, taking, and it was supposed to be used for marketing purposes. So whatever, I'm doing all these photos and everything, and I decided I'm going to get one with Tonka because I work with pets, so I'm going to do one with him. And when I would get him positioned and I would put the timer on the phone, then he would move and whatever. So by the time he did it, I was cracking up, and I realized that the only way I could get a photo with him is if I hugged him. And I can't tell you how many people have complimented me on that photo. I use it for now all my marketing and everything. And it was because I was comfortable, relaxed, and was, and that came across. And I think that when you get a speaker or someone is public speaking, if they come across where they're, I don't know, want to say, but they're likable by the people that are listening to them, or they can connect obviously some way with them, then the potential is so much better.
Good point. And Tonka is a beautiful boy.
He is a beautiful boy.
Anyone have an experience of learning something, in the face of adversity, or like an unexplained situation where all of a sudden there was a transformational moment and you could really tell that you would never be the same after that as you were before it?
All the time.
If you're a lucky one, then that's how the world is.
I thought you were shaking your head no, Ken. I was like, oh my God.
It's just thinking that's a long list right there. Especially living the entrepreneurial life, It's like
Yeah. Out on the skinny branches is a really good place to find out what your gut is made of.
hmm
Mm, I love that. That's a good quote, Bill.
I don't know that I ever heard it anywhere before. I just love it.
Yeah, but it's great.
When you think about the ongoing growth and development opportunity that we all have, the way of being curious about things. And I was also thinking, Ken, when you were talking about people who learn how to defend themselves when they get into a scrape, I've found that the people who are really getting value out of that, not in terms of technique or strength or anything like that, or the knowledge that they can kick somebody's behind, it's the calmness that comes, where the storm doesn't have to upset you because you're going to be sufficient, you're going to make it to the other side, and now your goal is to make sure that the other person makes it to the other side too. And as you always say, meeting them where they are. Sometimes when you can do that, the conflict just disappears.
Well, it's just, I think it's like anything. I think, I always come back to what do you invest in daily? Because then as things come up, it's just like practice. Like, I can remember years ago I had a parent, and they wanted their kid to get hit a lot. They were like 8. and they felt they needed to learn how to take a hit so that, if they get bullied, they know what it would feel like. And, and there are styles where they do that. You just start getting whacked around pretty early on, but especially with kids, we take them through a progression where we teach control. And over time, what happens is that gets less structured. Things happen and you get whacked here and there, and when you do, someone says, "Oops," and it's like not personal, it's not intentional. So they slowly over time learn to kind of get hit, And I remember this parent coming to me years later because they had just seen their kid, who is now 12, get kicked in the head so hard that knocked their headgear right off their head. It was like it was a little much, and they came up laughing and complimenting the other kid that kicked him on the kick. And he said, all those years ago, I wanted him to learn to do it, and it's happened so gradually over time. There's no fear of it, and it's not even a big deal. It's like you're saying, it was nothing personal. There's calmness about it, from just these little investments, So if you make little investments of just taking a few breaths and pausing each day,
Mm.
how is that going to show up and present itself when a crisis comes up and you're getting a lot of energy thrown towards you, towards another person that's upset? Or, you know, you drink water every day, like drink 16 ounces of water first thing when you get up in the morning. That's what I always do. How does that help you, as you move through your life? It's like all those little things. So it's these intentional little investments that kind of start to create this bank account that you trust you can draw from when the big waves come. And they always come. We just don't know when or what they'll look like. So, and that was the interesting thing, is I think that the conversation I was having a couple days ago was about people who were convinced they knew what the wave was going to look like and they needed to be ready for it. And, I wonder how well that works out for them. Because in my experience, it's never the wave you think it's going to be, you know?
I've not heard any good weather reports on that one. No.
I think very similarly, as you say, you both were talking and you're talking about, you know, meeting people where they are or whatever. When you practice yoga, you're meeting yourself where you are. And so that's, to me, because it is a practice for yourself, even though you might be with a group. And, what happens when you don't meet yourself where you are? You get injured, you do something you're not ready to do, you know, and it, most of the time doesn't work out well. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. But, and practicing that and realizing it's okay. Like, if you can't, I'm not feeling my best today, but it's okay. That's how I'm feeling today.
Yeah, the self-diagnostic of whether or not it's appropriate for you to exert yourself today is really important. And sometimes, people feel like they have to push through and work through something when the smartest thing they could possibly do is to honor the fact that they're under the weather, or they have a little bit of a problem with their knee. And it might be just the right time to take a little time out and find a different way, to get whatever practice you want to get in, whether it's spiritual, physical, or mental. And that's the thing, that I've been working on the last year or so, is that whole notion of, yeah, I should probably go work out today, or I should probably run, but damn it, I don't feel like it. I mean, and I really don't feel happy within myself that that would be the right thing for me to do. And more often than not, if I honor that, the next day I come back with a vengeance, or maybe it takes 2 days to get back. But I've been nursing a knee now since I overexerted last week and took a bad turn. And so now it's actually difficult for me to just walk, and that's humbling.
Well, yes, it is humbling. And I think there is, like, I mean, there's always something you can do. It might not be what you thought you were going to do. And that's when Ken's like, the plan, of the, you know, there is no plan. It's just reading where you are and having to say, okay, I'm going to modify today. going to do something, but it's just not going to be what I had planned originally.
Yeah, there was a Felix the Cat character who I think was called Tokyo Sam, and he'd get himself into these situations where things weren't going well and he was about to get hit, in the face or something like that, and he'd say, "Hold everything, please," and the world would stop so he could walk around and figure out what he needed to do next. I don't know anybody who's ever been able to accomplish that. No timeouts, no substitutions.
And along those lines too, I was listening to Glennon Doyle's podcast, and she was talking about going through her day and saying, I should go for a walk, but why am I so tired? Maybe I should do some writing, but why am I so tired? Maybe I should eat something, but why am I so tired? And the partner finally said, maybe you should just take a nap. Like you forget the simple things.
Sometimes the message is so difficult to hear, isn't it?
Right.
Mhm.
Well, we get caught up in the story of, you know, what we believe we need to do to be successful, you
Mhm.
know, and it's kind of funny. I love the Jim Collins in his book Good to Great, or maybe it's in Great by Choice. He talks about the 20-mile march, and it's based on the two South Pole polar, the expeditions, and one group, they had basically their plan was every day, regardless of the weather, they were going to walk. They were going to get as close as they could to covering 20 miles. So, and on a good day, they'd stop early, even if they felt they could do more. And on a bad day, they'd push as close as they could, but they'd try to do the best they could. And that group made it. And the competing group would just go as far as they could on the good days and then hunker down on the bad. And they all died, never reached there. And and it was just, his whole point of the story was how often we end up, and he was talking in terms of business, and I definitely experienced this, but even personally, it's like, I feel good, I've got to run miles and miles. Oh, I feel like crap, I can't do anything, and we end up on this kind of bungee cord
Mhm.
instead of just taking what we can get, and also not overextending when we could, you know, and creating this kind of more of a balanced rhythm to our life. So, and naps are part of life. Naps are good, and so is ice cream, and so are vacations, and but it's like everything. If it's, you turn your life into a giant bowl of ice cream, that's probably not going to work out for you either. So yeah, 20-mile march your way along.
I like the part about naps. For those of you at home, if you haven't tried it recently, give it a shot. The really, really cool thing about what comes after a nap is a refreshed mind for me, and also a gratitude. That I'm in a position where I can do this. I can take a 20-minute nap. Sometimes I just close my eyes, and it's a mock meditation. What I mean by that is it's not with any intention. I just am doing what I can to notice my breathing, and then try to guess when the timer is going to go off for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And it's remarkable after a while how close I come in going 3, 2, 1 in my mind. I do this with traffic lights too. Play the game of when they're going to turn from red to green or yellow or whatever. Welcome back, Jan.
Thank you.
We're doing a little bouncy stuff today, but it's all good. It's all part of what life work looks like, right? But the nap, I can't give enough credit to that, and it's really wasted on 5-year-olds.
I find I'm getting better at them when the older I get too.
There
I
is
can,
something about that.
yeah, I can do it
You've
sitting
had more
up.
practice.
Yes.
Plus, if you get up between 4 or 5 in the morning, like I do, yeah, the naps they'll let you know when it's time.
Hmm.
So let's honor Mr. Wooden, and we might even want to consider for a moment that his commitment was quite different than Vince Lombardi. You guys know who Vince Lombardi and John Wooden are. Yeah. Now, Vince was the father of the modern football offense, which almost always included a running back, a quarterback, or somebody getting the ball and sweeping to the outside. That was his greatest contribution, and he got that to an art form. And his goal with his players was to win every single game and to win the championship and to win and to win and to win. His famous quote that I heard him say in a documentary when he was older was, "Winning is not just the important thing, it's the only thing." And that quote he is remembered for, and he actually felt pretty bad, with all the other things that he did over the years and his accomplishments, that's what people remembered him for. And John Wooden, by the way, what do you have? Nine national championships, I think. And he had some of the greatest players ever, Bill Walton, Lou Alcindor, the list just goes on and on, who we know as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he would always tell his players, we're only interested in being a better person than we were yesterday. And I'm not interested in training the best athletes in the world. I'm interested in training the best people in the world. I want you to be prepared for life. And funny enough, most of the people that ever coached with him, especially the ones that went on to be coaches, transferred that kind of thinking into what they did as well. And the neat part of it is the whole idea of taking your eye off of your performance in this moment and putting your eye on what can I do that's going to be my personal best. But two different ways of looking at it. You convince all the people around you that we're going to win, by golly, or he'd say something else, Mr. Lombardi. And then John Wooden, who would talk to the individual person in whatever style they needed to be talked to get the best out of that human being every time they performed.
Like the Ted Lasso approach.
I love Ted Lasso, and I think he is pretty much modeled after John Wooden, but he's a lot younger and probably a little more handsome. And sorry, John Wooden family, but Ted's a great one. I think Ted could take just about anybody and make a champion out of them. Because it's about how do you fit in with the other pieces of the puzzle. You can have all of the weight on your shoulders and be convinced that you're the star that has to win the game for us. Or you can figure out how to make everybody else around you as good as they can be. That team approach.
And back to how your own mind works, because he's got all those demons too. So, he's really good with other people, but he can't quite figure out his own internal dialogue.
And I think is a brilliant character, to just show how, in any human being, no matter what you're doing, we were talking about this before, where you get to a point where there's a failure to be. And that failure to be for him was when they were playing, for the cup. When they were in a game where everything is on the line, and suddenly he had a breakdown and left the field. And that is, to me, what he does after that. I can't wait to see, how the next season comes, because I do understand we got another one coming soon. Probably should have said spoiler alert. It won't make a difference. You won't remember what I said when you're watching it anyway. And Ted Lasso is a show that's probably worth watching 2 or 3 times the whole all of the episodes. Well, I think we've had fun with those two quotes. Ken read his, and I went off my memory. And you at home know by now that it makes no difference what comes out of my mouth. It's about the sentiment and the feeling, and transferring, that to you if I'm effective at it at all. So don't be afraid and have to fall, all over yourself, quoting exactly the words that someone great said. Martin Luther King did it all the time.
Well, I keep having this Jimi Hendrix quote come up, especially when it goes with the piece. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I didn't know it. I never heard it till maybe a couple of years ago, and then that he was the author of it was surprising to me. But
Yeah.
and now it keeps coming up in conversation. So I love that quote.
Yeah, the quotes typically do run in waves.
Mm.
I've noticed that when I hear something this week, it shows up again many times over the next 2 to 3 weeks, but that's a good one. Along with the goal in life is not to have more breaths, but to have breaths or have experiences that take your breath away, or not more days in your life, but more life in your days. Those are fairly simple, to reacquaint yourself with right after you've gotten punched in the gut. And my favorite quote, I'm going to leave you with this. This will probably be the last thing I'll say today, maybe. Some of the best things I've ever done in my life, I wound up throwing up right afterwards. And that's a true story. Not that I do it frequently, the throwing up part, but it definitely widened, my ability to decide whether something was really good for me or not. Took a lot of the fear out, let's put it that way. So anybody else have any parting thoughts?
Being one with the obstacle. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, just physically on one level, but it's interesting. It's like even the quote about power. I think it's important to recognize that we all have a love of power, and you can push against that, or you can move with it and be appropriate with it. It's and I wonder sometimes if we don't inadvertently create an abundance of resistance with things that are just human, and then that tends to create all of these disconnects and all the weirdness that we experience. So there's your Ted Lasso. Is as he becomes one with his demons,
Mm.
that becomes something that he can move with, and all it does is create a deeper level of compassion and understanding. That self-awareness is going to make him such an incredible teacher. So now he'll have the skill to mesh with the heart, and and the way he presents in the world. So it's just kind of interesting. So every day when I'm training, I'm thinking, not I'm not going to beat this thing. I'm going to move with it, and as best I can, I'm going to mesh with it. And if I prepared properly and things go my way, it'll work out. And if they don't, I may fall on the ground, you know, or whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
Such good points, Ken. And then like we talk about life never being. So like one of my favorite things to like if you want to make God laugh, just tell her your plans. That.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll just see about that. Or, oh, no, you don't.
Hold my beer.
Yeah. Exactly. Miss Jan,
Nope, I'm good.
are you?
Yeah.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've just spent another pretty close to an hour together, lighting the candle, a world that works. And you found this podcast, so I know you can find us again. But we are literally on, I believe, all platforms at this point. So that's kind of a cool thing. And in the meantime, we'll continue talking, and you continue listening, and then we'll see how that goes for a while. But in the meantime, bless you. And if you get caught in a traffic jam, be the traffic jam.
Be one with it.
You won with it. Yeah.
Run with it.
All right. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Have a good week.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.